Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your phone calls and your emails, especially on a First Amendment Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend. Just remember what the holiday is all about. It marks the sacrifice of so many men and women who died in the service of their country. Just remember that. Have fun at the barbecue. Enjoy your family and friends. But please make sure you remember the sacrifices that so many made to make sure that our freedom stayed intact. But welcome to First Amendment Friday. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day of the week. But on First Amendment Friday, we change the rules a bit. That means that every subject is fair game. And, of course, naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. If you want to vote in our Twitter poll, I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But I want to tell you a couple of things. Joe Biden is off on holiday travel because, after all, nothing big like, say, a multi-trillion-dollar debt increase is on the line right now. So Joe can leave town, right? Is that Joe's approach to things? That when the United States is hanging with the threat, real or not, the threat that the United States will, for the first time in its history, default on its debt, Janet Yellen now says the drop-dead date is June the 5th. Now, could the government shift some monies around and make sure the bills get paid? Yes, that could happen. But we understand that long-term, that's not going to work. So that's on the agenda. That's number one. Number two, a state judge, has now acted to block an abortion ban. Well, it's a 6-week limitation. So they call it a ban, but all they're saying is you need to make your decision by 6 weeks in pregnancy. And you say, well, and I've heard the hogwash that you've been fed by the mainstream media. Why, most women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. You know, when that all came up last year, after the decision, the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court that put this back in the hands of state authorities, do you know what I did? I went to government agencies and I looked at the numbers they had. The Centers for Disease Control, no, it's not an agency I necessarily like or trust, but they say that by the time you reach the 6-week mark in pregnancy, about 50% of the women who are going to have an abortion have already had it at 6 weeks. At 8 weeks, the number goes to 2/3 of all the women. So it is categorically untrue that women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Half of them who are going to get an abortion get one by 6 weeks. So when they call it a ban, imagine this kind of logic. A ban that still lets 50% of the people who are going to have an abortion by 6 weeks. Now, if you tighten up the requirements and you say you have to make a decision by 6 weeks into your pregnancy, that number will shoot up dramatically. So is it really a ban at all? I would argue it's a lie. But a South Carolina judge today blocked the state's new law, and this is a state judge that did it, that would ban most abortions after fetal cardiac activity is detected, usually around 6 weeks, sometimes it's 7 weeks or a little bit longer. The injunction stays in effect until the state Supreme Court can review the measure. The ruling comes one day after the law took effect, following Governor Henry McMaster's signature. The decision means the state will go back to the previous law that allowed abortions up to 20 weeks after fertilization. So not a gigantic change, especially when somebody explains what I just did. Most of the abortions, half of them are done by 6 weeks anyway. If you tighten up the requirements and say it's 6 weeks or no abortion, the women who are going to seek an abortion will get it done by 6 weeks. Now, am I happy about that? Absolutely not. But is it a ban as it's being portrayed by the media? No, it most certainly is not. But since it's First Amendment Friday, I thought I'd go to your calls at 866. Hey, Lars. Let's go first to Jerry in Wisconsin. Hey, Jerry, welcome to the Lars Larson Show.
Yeah, Lars. I'd like to mention that Donald Trump just did an interview with, I think it was CNN, where he talked about his phone call, his perfect phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State about after he lost the 2020 election and he lost the state of Georgia. Now, even assuming if you think that he really won Georgia, which I don't, but even assuming that, this is what Trump said. He wanted the Georgia Secretary of State to find him votes and that he owed him, that the Georgia Secretary of State owed Trump votes. This is, and he threatened criminal charges like, whoa, if you don't, this could be a crime. Trump was still president. He was threatening, implicit threat to use the Justice Department or to use the power of the presidency against someone, and you wanted that person to manufacture votes for him. Now, I know you're not going to interpret it that way.
You won't be surprised that I disagree with you, Jerry. But number one, what would he threaten the Secretary of State of Georgia with? You said make it a crime. The president can't make something a crime. The Congress can. The president can. So what is it you're saying that Donald Trump allegedly threatened the Secretary of State with?
Well, one, we have to assume that Trump knows his actual powers because he thinks he was somewhat of a dictator, but he was still president and the Justice Department was still under him. It doesn't matter that he actually had the power to prosecute the Georgia Secretary of State. It's the belief that Trump had that he had the power to do that, or he had the power to threaten that, and he could get someone to do his bidding. Can you
tell me something, Jerry? Help me out with this. Do you think let's stick to Georgia. Do you think Georgia's election count was counted legitimately?
I think it was, but even if it wasn't counted,
hold on,
Trump
Jerry.
wanted him to find
Jerry,
make votes.
You can repeat yourself several times, but I thought we'd get to some new ground.
Point.
Now, when Stacey Abrams said that she thought she actually won the governorship not once but twice, do you think she was right?
No, I don't think she necessarily wanted. But this is the thing.
I didn't say necessarily. Do you think she was also saying the Georgia election was not counted correctly?
I don't believe that the election was stolen from Abrams. See, that's the thing. I don't believe every time a Democrat loses, it's because of part of the corruption.
Okay, I'm just asking so I know where you stand. I'm asking. The way I read Trump's call was that he was saying to the Secretary of State, we don't think this was counted right, especially because the phony baloney excuse that, we've got to shut down the count in the middle of the count at the same time it's being shut down in 5 other states because there's a water main break at the Staples Center, which turns out was a leaking men's urinal, and that excuse went right out the window. And then on closed-circuit cameras, we see people taking suitcases out from under tables in the counting center where allegedly counting had stopped. None of that. Hold on. Let me ask you the question, Jerry. Jerry, let me ask you the question.
You're just pushing false claims.
No, I'm not. I'm telling you things. I'm not talking about what Trump said. I'm telling you what I said. I saw them shut down the count in the middle of the count for no good.
Why wasn't this brought up before the courts? Why didn't the courts take this?
Jerry,
why in the courts?
They didn't want to get in the middle of it. So most of the cases were decided on procedural grounds where the judge never had to look at the evidence. But, Jerry, what I wanted to ask you, if you'll give me an answer, did any of that make you the least bit suspicious?
I've read about these supposed claims. If these claims were legitimate, they would have been argued in front of the courts.
If it had got in front of the courts, but most of the judges in most of those 60 cases said, I'm going to dismiss this case on procedural grounds, and the judges never looked at the evidence. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show on First Amendment Friday. Jerry, you're great. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Unlike the current president of the United States who plagiarizes all the time, you're always going to hear me give credit to people when we cite their work on the air. And I thought Nellie Bowles over at the Free Press put this so well. She was talking about the problem of DUI. I've got a dog in the fight on DUI. My mom was killed by a drunk driver. I don't have any tolerance for drunk drivers or drunk driving. But here's the way she put it. Best to let someone do some murders first. Nikita Marie Walker, a Washington, D.C. resident, was a very, very bad driver. She had 3 DUIs and $12,000 in unpaid tickets, most of them for speeding. But none of that was enforced. No one, say, booted her car, God forbid. No, the key for modern it's all good vibes mantra policing is just watch and wait until there's a murder. Nikita, this is again Nellie Bowles writing, I like her writing. Nikita one day drove drunk, ran a red light, got flagged by a cop, and then sped off, slamming into a car and traffic and killing Lyft driver Mohammed Kamara, 42 years old, and his pastors Olvin Velasquez and Jonathan Mendez. This week she was charged with murder. Who could have ever predicted this would happen? I'm shocked she was charged with murder for killing 3 men. Seems pretty sexist. Let's unpack that some other time. Anyway, if a drunk driver kills me, I hope I at least have the dignity of it being a fresh drunk driver, somebody that nobody expected. A woman with 3 DUIs and $12,000 in speeding tickets, and they don't take her car away, and then she kills 3 people, and they say, oh, but now we've charged her. Nellie Bowles is absolutely right. That is absolutely pathetic. Let's go to the phones now at 866 Hey Lars. And naysayers always go first at 866-439-5277. Larry, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to comment on something that you had just spoke about earlier in your show about women knowing that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And I don't think that's true for personal experience, but now, keep in mind, I am pro-life, but there has to be some kind of law that says, say, 12 weeks. You cannot have one legally for any reason. But I don't believe, like, say, a 13, 14-year-old little girl gets assaulted, and she does not know that she would even become pregnant. And by the time she finds out... Hold
on, Larry, can I stop you there for a moment? So the 13-year-old girl gets assaulted, and she tells no one. Because the minute she tells anybody responsible, you know, her mom and dad, a teacher, anybody, the teachers, a nurse, anybody else would be required to notify. Every state has a mandatory reporting law that makes it a crime not to report it. So it wouldn't be that she wouldn't know she was pregnant, because if she, now, the only scenario that would work for would be where she's been assaulted, raped, she's become pregnant, she doesn't know because she hasn't told anybody, and she hasn't been tested for STDs or tested for pregnancy, which would routinely happen if a young girl was assaulted sexually and told anybody, mom, dad, teachers, social workers, anybody, they'd say, well, we need to get you checked out medically. We probably need to get you into counseling because you've been assaulted, and we need to check and see if you're pregnant. So that would only happen if that very young girl told absolutely no one that she had been sexually assaulted. Is that the scenario you're thinking of? Huh?
Yeah, but that happens a lot.
I don't know that it happens a lot. I think it does happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but do you really think it happens a lot that 13-year-old girls are raped? Nobody notices a change in demeanor. Nobody asks her what's going on, what's wrong. Nobody sees any of that. When you say it happens a lot, I'd love to see some backup. And here's the backup I used. I was talking about the problem generally, and that is when people say most women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. When I went to the CDC numbers, and they give ranges. They don't give a 6-week range. They give an 8-week range and a 4-week range. The number of women who've had an abortion when they are 8 weeks along is 2/3, 66% or so, according to the CDC. It's around 50%. They don't have an exact 6-week number. But if 2/3 of the women who are going to get an abortion have had it at 8 weeks, how many of them don't know they're pregnant when they have it? I mean, do they walk in and say, I'd like to get an abortion, I might be pregnant?
Well, no, by 8 weeks, you've missed probably 2 menstrual cycles.
Yep.
Theoretically. But I don't know if I kind of assume you are.
Well, then
but you can have a menstrual
go to this.
And be pregnant.
But Larry, go to this. Who are the women, the 50% of women who get an abortion, and the stats say they've got an abortion when they're 6 weeks into pregnancy? Why are they getting an abortion if they don't know they're pregnant?
Okay, no, you're talking about ones that do. I'm talking about the ones that did not know that they were pregnant. So by 8 weeks, that's a little more realistic. But again, that's just you don't know how many women out there can have a menstrual cycle while they're pregnant and not know.
I've heard. I've certainly. I don't spend a lot of time talking to my female friends
that's why
about it, but I'm aware it can happen. All I'm saying is it reasonable to put some kind of limitation in there? Right now, the state that did this is South Carolina. It was 20 weeks. They've lowered it to 6. And if the voters of that state,
huge difference.
15% or what?
From 20 to 6. That's a huge difference. I mean,
wow, that is a difference.
You are cutting everything out.
Well, no, I'm not, because if you say if half the women have had an abortion when they're 6 weeks along, you're cutting out half the abortions. That's not a ban, is it?
No, I'm saying when they went from 20 to 6 weeks, I'd like to know about. Okay, so then you have the other half that are, we said 2/3 get them at 8 weeks.
By 8 weeks, and half of them by 6 weeks. Half by 6 weeks. So at 6 weeks, half the women.
People?
What's that?
Half of how many people?
Well, there are roughly 1 million abortions every year in America, about 1 million. And so half would be 500,000 have had the abortion by the time they get to 6 weeks. The other 500,000 do it, and some of them do it very, very late. And and here's where it gets to a really critical question. You live in Washington State. The people of South Carolina elected representatives who went to the legislature and said, this is the desire of our constituents. Should we honor that or not?
If the voters voted it in by state, then you have.
No. Well, but you understand, Larry, we don't live in a democracy. We have elements of democracy. We live in a representative form of government. Most democracies implode. They blow themselves up. Unless you're talking about a little town in Vermont or Maine or something, democracies don't work, because what happens is, I think it's Alexander Tytler who said, as soon as the population figures out they can vote themselves benefit from the public treasury, you're on the path to bankruptcy. So we deliberately have a republic, the longest lasting constitutional republic in world history, where the people are represented, but for the most part, we don't choose what laws by direct vote. We choose it through representatives. It's designed to move slowly for a reason. Now, there are times the slowness of a republic can actually frustrate people. But the problem is when you have something that moves fast, like you get a hot wind that blows through and everybody says that ought to be illegal and they vote on it. If we voted on laws nationally or voted on all laws at the state level, you'd get very rapid changes that tend to be like a whipsaw effect on the people. So we have representatives, which means you elect people, they go to the state capitol, they think, in theory, they have hearings on a bill, they hear from everybody who's griped about it or in favor of it, and then they put the law in. And even then they get it wrong, but at least the changes come relatively slowly. If the people's representatives in South Carolina, which is run as a representation system, if they've said this is the law our constituents want, should we honor that?
When you say constituents, aren't you talking about voters?
Well, I am, but what happens is in every legislative district, they say we're going to send Larry off to the state capitol. Now, does that mean Larry represents
the voters?
To represent the voters. And in many cases, let's say in your district, 60% of the voters are very conservative, 40% are very liberal. I would be a fool if I argued that you, as a conservative, would represent well the point of view of the liberals in that state. But that is the system we have. And I'm just asking, should we honor the decisions that are made by our representatives? I would argue yes, till somebody comes up with a better system. You got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on First Amendment Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend. By the way, my great producer, Donovan Sargent, has come up with the fact that we're not the oldest and longest republic in the world. There is a tiny little country, San Marino. It's about the size of the Vatican. And they apparently have been a republic for about 70 years longer than the United States. But it's a tiny little country within Italy called San Marino, and they are older. But it is First Amendment Friday. Here's the question I want you to consider in the Twitter poll, and then I'll go to calls. Should government schools have the legal right to inject your kids with anything they choose? and you are cut out altogether. There is a bill in New York State, Assembly Bill A276B. If it becomes law, the state assembly bill passed out of the health committee in Albany. Apparently, they're pushing hard to get this done before the legislative session is over. They want to cut parents out altogether and say, if we decide in the infinite wisdom of government-run schools that don't seem to do a very good job of education, but they're a great job of indoctrination, parents will be cut out completely of knowing which vaccines are injected into their kids. Should they be able to do that? I would say no. You can vote any way you like. At Lars Larson Show on Twitter and LarsLarson.com on the web. Brought to you by AMAC. Join a great conservative group that I joined years ago. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC's better for you and better for America. Now, we love naysayers on this show, so let's see how Joy does. Joy, welcome to First Amendment Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend. Where do you and I disagree?
Oh, I could have 50 different things to talk about, but I will go with the abortion issue. And I just think that we are living in so many extremes now, and the extremes don't benefit anyone. So following up on what the woman was saying, I think those states who are saying no abortions, except for very few situations, or those with 6 weeks.
That's not what it's, well, but yeah.
Well, I'm just
They're
saying
saying make a decision by 6 weeks, right, Joy?
But no, what I'm saying is that I think that, and George Will actually wrote an interesting article about it, and it's unusual that I agree with George Will, but I just think that we are in a place with so many issues in our country that we have to take an extreme. And I think if both sides
hold on,
together,
Joy, can I? Here's the problem I have with you calling it extreme. I would say it's extreme to kill unborn babies who've done nothing wrong. The 97% that don't involve rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother, 97%, that's what it describes. Is it extreme to say a woman should be able to kill a baby who's merely inconvenient? I consider that an extreme position. Do you?
well, no, I don't. And I think that we're
Wow.
never, no, but just the way you put it, though. I mean, I'm not.
Hold on, Joy,
but
would
no,
you like,
can
Joy,
I
hold on, stop for a
second.
second. Stop for a second, Joy. The people who favor abortion won't even say the word anymore. NARAL, which used to stand for the National Abortion Rights Action League, they don't even want to say the A word anymore. They said, oh, it doesn't mean that anymore. It means NARAL. Because even the people who push abortion, they don't want to say the word. If I was doing something and I didn't want to say the word that describes it, if I said, I think I'll go out for a little liquid entertainment tonight. Well, we all know how that translates. It means you're going to drink some booze. But if I can't even say I'm going to go have an alcoholic beverage, then maybe I shouldn't be doing it. Do you think that people who push abortion, who aren't even willing to say the word anymore, they call it pro-choice or they call it women's reproductive health care, try to find one of them, one of these liberal nitwits who's willing to even call it abortion or call it killing a baby. They won't do it.
Well, see, that's what I'm talking about. You've just called me a nitwit.
No, I didn't call you a nitwit. I said liberals who believe that nonsense. I assume you don't believe. Do you believe that nonsense? Maybe you are. I don't know.
But I don't. I am pro-choice, but I think that.
So you can't even say the word.
No, well, I don't support. I mean, I'm not fighting for abortions, but I'm pro-choice.
Well, hold on. Joy.
Can I just finish?
Yeah, go ahead and finish. Go ahead and finish.
Well, that's why these two extremes. I'm just saying that if both sides work together, and that we worked in every way we could to reduce abortion. We have. We
used to have 1.5 million a year. We're down to 1 million.
I know, but we were doing better when contraceptives were covered under health care, when we had sex education in
Do you know
schools.
how cheap? Do you know how cheap contraception is? The pill, if you want to buy it at
but
Walgreens or Targets, is about $9 a month.
But what I'm trying to do is, you're
That's 2
very
lattes.
conservative. I'm a liberal. Why can't
Well, then
we
say
work
something
together?
new, Joy, because all you're doing is telling
What
me.
as I'm saying, and again, this is what George Will was saying, is that I don't think you're going to eliminate people going for abortion. So I think
I'm not saying. Well, I would think that would be a desirable goal, but then what are you asking for, Joy? Because you won't be. I'm definitive when I say I don't want women killing their babies for convenience, and you said no. I'm in favor of that. Joy, say what you mean so we can actually talk about it instead of talking generalities.
I'm saying that what you call convenience, I wouldn't necessarily call convenience. I'm saying that you choose a place where it's 10 weeks or 12 weeks, that abortions are available after talking to your doctor and whatever, but then after that period, and based on viability, then you no longer can.
Well, but
get
Joy,
I
think you've just agreed with me. I hate to tell you this bad news, because I pointed out the CDC's own stats say half the women who get abortions today get them by 6 weeks. So if you put in a 6-week limit and say, if you're going to do this, get it done by 6 weeks, the half will probably go to 3/4 or higher, meaning most of the women who still.
But I'm just saying, I don't think 6 weeks right now is the reasonable amount. I mean,
Why?
you look, for example,
Hold on, Joy, stop for a second. Joy, stop for no, you can't. Stop for a second and answer this question. If half the women in America who get abortions today get them by 6 weeks, why is that an unreasonable amount of time?
Because probably that other half are those 13 and 14-year-old teenagers.
No, they're not.
Who have irregular periods, who don't realize they're pregnant.
Hold on, but Joy, you mean the
13-year-old
who's been sexually assaulted and doesn't tell anybody in the world about it, including a teacher, a parent, or anybody else?
Yes.
I think you're on the wrong track. And when I say convenience, Joy, this is why. When a young lady becomes pregnant, it should be a joyful event. Maybe it's not for her because it's inconvenient. It gets in the way of her work plans, her school plans, her romantic plans. Maybe it's from the last boyfriend and now she's with somebody else. Whatever the reason is, can you name me, other than rape, incest, and save the life of the mother? That's 3%. Name me a really good reason to end that baby's life.
Well, what I'm saying is that, again, that there are reasons that people have. For example,
no, I want you to name the reason, Joy.
I am. We have a terrible problem with domestic violence in Spokane. It's one of the highest. And
you're not going to get to an answer, Joy. I gave you all the time in the world, and you wouldn't give me an answer. So if the woman is the victim of domestic violence and she's been raped, there's a simple answer to that. Call the cops and lock the bastard up. Back in a moment. It's First Amendment Friday. Heading into Memorial Day, you got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on a First Amendment Friday. Always glad to be with you and always glad to take your calls. And on First Amendment Fridays, everything is fair game. By the way, transgender issues have kind of gone from being supported by state institutions to full-blown promotion of them. Is the transgender agenda only going to get worse from this point on? Sarah Parshall-Perry is a legal fellow in the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at Heritage. Sarah, it's good to have you back, and happy First Amendment Friday.
Thanks much for having me back, Lars.
So is the transgender agenda getting worse, despite all the indications of the contrary, where major companies are being blown up financially and otherwise? Bud Light, you've got, of course, Target that's getting just roasted right now, both financially and otherwise. Disney that has been roasted since last year, and they're really taking a beating from the public, and yet this is still being pursued?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this is not a slippery slope. It is a cliff, and it always has been. In fact, after we sort of realized the promises of Obergefell versus Hodges, and we saw individuals be given marriage equality, we were told that the debate was only about live and let live. But many of us who were conservatives argued that, well, this is sort of the beginning of a slippery slope. And unfortunately, that proved to be prescient, because fewer than 8 years later, we're now walking into mainstream retailers and seeing tuck-friendly swimsuits for minor children. That, to me, indicates that we have hit the gas on what was once just a very sort of, we want the same equality, we want the same legal rights as you, and we just want to live side by side in harmony, to what is now an active, aggressive, overlording attempt to groom children into the actual lifestyle. And we see this being introduced in younger and younger public school classrooms, drag queen story hours. Glisten, who has worked behind the scenes to help develop school policies that actually facilitate social transitions, hides those transitions from parents. They, by the way, are a major donor to Target, who, as you know, is developing and has developed such a massive pride collection of materials that they've now had to move to different parts of the store due to customer outrage. But we're seeing this whip up into a fervor. I'm grateful that it seems as though individuals, everyday voters, the John Q. Smiths of the world, who may ordinarily not have decided that they were going to take their transactional consumer dollars elsewhere, are waking up and realizing exactly how active an effort this is to force all of America to choke down the given progressive narrative.
I'm talking to Sarah Parshall-Perry, who works at the Heritage Foundation and the Mies Center. Am I right that the next benchmark on this is going to be trying to norm the idea of adults having sex with children, and that any limitations on that, at least according to the UN and a bunch of other crazy countries, are to be wiped out, so that we will have adults having sex with children, and that will be not just legal, but normed, and if you disparage it, you'll be in as much trouble as if you disparage somebody for being lesbian or gay?
Undoubtedly, Lars, and we know that once you've opened up the Pandora's box of sexual and gender deviancy, that there is no coming back from that. We've got the horse out of the barn on this one, unfortunately, and all of this, for me, when I wrote the piece at American Conservative, actually stemmed from the fact that there was a report that was published at the International Committee of Jurists, and that particular committee indicated a report that there was ultimately very little to be said for age of consent laws. And in fact, age of consent laws themselves were immaterial, because there could be actual consent to sex with minors, even though those were prohibited under law. So it automatically began to flex at that boundary. Now we're seeing states like Colorado, where the Democrats downvoted indecent exposure to a minor from making it a felony. They didn't want it to be a felony because that unfairly targeted the drag and trans community. On top of that, we saw a sitting Minnesota legislator introduce a bill removing language that would have clarified pedophilia as not expressly protected in their human rights law. Now, the explanation was that that language was duplicative. My response is, if you have an explicit clarification that pedophilia is not protected and you remove that language, what is the conclusion the ordinary voter is to come to? That now pedophilia is any other sexual orientation. Johns Hopkins University just hired a researcher who had to resign from Old Dominion University because she was arguing for the value of minor attracted persons as being less stigmatizing than the pedophilia label. It has taken off.
Yeah, but here's the question. I understand this is a fringe end of the left, but as the fringe drags the Democrats and most of the rest of the mainstream left, if you will, off to the edge of the cliff, aren't Americans going to start abandoning that and say, we can't get behind the idea of, kids having sex with adults and telling your child, would you like one of those swimsuits where you can tuck away your privates and pretend to be a girl? That this kind of in-your-face stuff, I would think, wouldn't fly even with the, sort of the center left of the Democrat Party. Or am I wrong?
No, I do think you're right, but I think we've only begun to sort of crack that seam a little bit. Now we're seeing everyday Americans who might have ordinarily voted moderate or even Democrat up to this point, some lesbians, some feminists, people who would not traditionally align themselves with conservative values go, wait a minute. Now you are arguing for the double mastectomies of healthy 15-year-old girls who might be going through hormonal puberty stages. I think now that we've seen this backdoor medicalization of minor children who are going through normal pubertal processes, and I'm not talking about people who have for example, transsexuals who might be born with both sex organs. I'm talking about the average American teenager. I think that has begun to wake a sleeping giant. The parents are awake, moderates are awake. It's time to act.
Let's hope. That's Sarah Parshall-Parrish. Sarah, thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend. We always appreciate your insights because they're so on target. Hey, are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000? Well, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity for you. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic. They've already helped out 1,500 small business owners get about $300 million in funding, and they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits, and they're with you every step of the way, even when there's an audit. They have an audit safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already got the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. It's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at Get My Funds at 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on a First Amendment Friday where every subject is fair game. And I'm going to get to your phone calls here in just a moment. But first, welcome to the best conversation in talk journalism. It happens right here every day. And on First Amendment Fridays, we open up the phone lines and every subject is fair game. I want you to consider this. There is one of the lesser-known guarantees in the U.S. Constitution that you have a right as an American citizen or somebody in the United States protected by the Constitution, not always citizens. Oftentimes it's a green card holder or others, but you have a right to travel. But that does not stop the government from banning certain forms of travel. So I want you to keep a close eye on Europe. Western Europe, because American liberals love Western Europe. They say everything they're doing is smart. Consider this. In France, they have now banned short-haul flights by airplane. You say, why is that important? You say, because if the distance can be covered in 2.5 hours by an equivalent train ride, you will no longer be allowed to get on an airplane and fly from point A to point B within France. You say, why is that important? You say, I want you to think about this. In America, if you decide to get in your car and drive from one coastline to the other or from northern North Dakota all the way down to Texas, nobody can stop you. And if you decide you want to take an airline flight anywhere you want to go, nobody is standing there to say, why, you could do that flight, you could do that travel using a bus. You can do it on a train. You can do it on some other method. Therefore, you are forbidden to use air travel. And you know what French people are going to see? There will be people, the connecting flights are not banned. So let me tell you why that's important. So you're an American citizen, you fly to France, and you decide that you are going to, fly to France and then hop from the major airport, Orly, out to some smaller city. You're going to be allowed to do that. A French national who wants to take that second hop in your trip will be forbidden to make the travel. They'll say, you get to ride the train instead. Watch how fast that starts to happen if American liberals glom onto that, because they'll say, why, you should be able to just take the Amtrak there. Instead, it might take you a lot longer, might be less convenient, but we're going to make you do that. We don't want you on a plane. Planes are for elites, like, say, John Kerry. In any case, that's one thing I want to throw out for you. Second, our Twitter poll is about a new proposed law in New York State. It has not yet passed out of the Assembly. It says that parents in New York State will be completely cut out of knowing what vaccines are being injected into their kids. In other words, the school can say, we decided that your kid needs the jab or needs this or needs that. Parents won't even know about it. They won't know about it. They won't have any say-so in it. So should government schools have the legal right to inject your kids with anything the government chooses? I would answer that an absolute flat no. Today's Twitter poll can be found at Lars Larson Show and at larslarson.com, brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has the conservative values I believe in, so I joined the group a long time ago. It's a great group, offers great benefits, but I care about their conservatism the most. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you and better for America. To your calls now. Let's start on a First Amendment Friday with Cindy in the Silver State of Nevada. Hey, Cindy, welcome to First Amendment Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars, thanks for taking the call.
You bet.
I wonder if anyone has brought up the notion that the proliferation of transgender topics and activity and everything that's happening might not be just, it seems like a fad, but it almost seems like it came out of nowhere. I mean, I'm sure this has been an issue for a long time, but the proliferation of it just seems profound. When people first started getting body piercings and tattoos, you could turn away and say, oh, my God, what are they going to do when they get old and have to look at these things they've done to themselves? But what they've done to themselves physically and what doctors have done to them physically, these are permanent issues. And to me, it just seems like the most horrific fad to have ever swept our country.
I agree with you, Cindy. And let me tell you, I've read at least one theory that's interesting that suggests that some of the kids are autistic and that there are forms of autism where you feel very separated from it. You feel different from everybody else and you're not very well accepted. I understand that. It's a problem. It can be addressed. But if you suddenly announce, I'm transgender, all of a sudden you start to get a lot of very positive attention. That's one. That's one element of that. The other element for kids who are not autistic, let's say, do you know of a single child who at one age or another, at all ages while they're a child, does not want to get attention from the adults around them?
No, that doesn't happen.
No, they always, it could be a 4-year-old in the cereal aisle screaming at the top of his lungs. And it can be the kid who says, I want to get mom and dad's attention, so I'm going to become really good at something. Throwing a football, swinging a bat. I want to be really good at swimming. They get positive attention. We also know kids who go out and they're constantly getting into trouble. But when they get into trouble, they get attention. And all of us say, rationally, that makes no sense because you're getting negative attention. You've got the cops, you've got a court, you've got a judge, you got your mom and dad all mad at you, but you are getting attention. It's kind of a pathology. But I would suggest that an awful lot of kids realize they look at what happens to anybody who declares, I am transgender, and they get a tremendous amount of attention. And that's why you literally have some classroom teachers saying, why a third of the kids in my class are transgender. Well, transgenderism is about 2/3 of 1% of the population, which means that in a group of, let's say, 200 kids, you'd probably find one that is truly transgender. But if they realize it's a popular fad, as you said, it could very much have the power to get kids to say, yeah, I want to do that. I notice everybody's getting a lot of attention. But as you also point out, very importantly, if a young man decides he's going to transition and at 14 or 15 he starts taking puberty blockers, he may change his body in ways that cannot be undone and that will affect him for the rest of life. unlike a tattoo. A tattoo, at least you can cover it up with something else or even have it removed. You take the puberty blockers, that may be forever. Thank you for the call, Cindy. Hey, by the way, if aging muscles and joints are slowing you down, do what I do. It's Lars for Gen Pop Extra Strength Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it into your knees, your elbows, your shoulders, and your back, and especially your hands. It melts right into muscles and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, for me, it's a fantastic moisturizer. My wife and I love it. It's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not yet sold in stores, but for my listeners, you get a trial size bottle of 10 treatments for just $9.95. Now that's a $20 value. It's not a subscription, and shipping comes free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com. Or dial them up, 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. It's a pleasure to be with you on a First Amendment Friday night. Glad to take your phone calls and emails. Coming up in just a moment, we'll talk to our friend Christian Toto about some new movies for this weekend. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I've missed talking to him for the last couple of weeks. Christian Toto joins me now, the host of Hollywood and Toto podcast and our go-to guy when it comes to pop culture and movies and things like that. Christian, welcome back.
Oh, good to be back.
You tell me that this new movie called When the Mob Came is the cancel culture documentary we've all been waiting for. Please tell us more.
Yeah, it's about a Canadian political candidate. Her name is Caitlin Ford, and she was canceled in the most egregious, aggressive, and wildly unfair way possible right before the election. And they painted her as a white supremacist. There was no basis in reality. They cherry-picked some information, that she had shared on Facebook in a private message. Somehow someone got it, just took out a few quotes that made her look bad, and her career in politics ended. But it was more than that. I mean, the people around her suffered. She couldn't go here. She couldn't go there. Even when she would get interviewed by a radio show host, the radio show host would get pummeled. And that there was one in particular who eventually left her job because for the crime of talking to this person and getting her side of the story. But it really does, it's more than that. It's about all of us. It's about the culture. It's about what people face when they get canceled. It's about how unforgiving it is. And, again, it's focusing on one story, but you've got to think, man, that could be me. That could be you. That could be your neighbor. Anyone could get attacked in this fashion. And it's terrible. But she got this crash course in cancel culture. She happened to be a part-time filmmaker, and she made a movie about it, focusing on her and what she's gone through. It's pretty amazing.
So it actually documents her experience going through all of this. How early on did she start shooting this? Because I usually find those, sort of inside like the Weiner documentary about Anthony Weiner, who's a despicable person. But I love that documentary because you got a chance to see it as it was happening, even though he's, like I said, a despicable character. But the guy was, it was kind of fun to watch train wrecks, and he is certainly a train wreck. In this case, she decided, if this is happening to me, I'm just going to make a movie about it to tell everybody.
Yeah, I don't think it was the kind of thing where she was having cameras on her and shooting all the time. The film does have some, recreations and trying to approximate what she was going through, what the other players in her sphere were going through as well. So, yeah, that was an example of, well, let's shoot a movie about X, and it turns out it's about Y. This is different. This is more about looking back and just piecing the puzzle pieces together and figuring out what went wrong. It's just amazing. It's not just losing a job or a political race or something like that. It's far more comprehensive. It's really frightening. And the fact that the media, which you know as well as I do, can be so corrupt, so dishonest, where they don't think, well, gosh, maybe there's a different story. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe these comments don't line up with her lifetime of work, and maybe there's no other background or evidence to suggest that she's the monster we're depicting. None of that. They loved the narrative. They kind of wanted to get her out of the picture, and they did. And it really does capture. She doesn't want to be a victim, but she also can't help but being punished by this. It's a very complicated picture that it's painting.
Did she ever get to explaining what was it that generated this? Or, in other words, I can imagine two ways. Somebody who wants her to lose her political race, goes after her for this, and everybody else piles on? Or is it just that these days many of the people in the media simply look around and say, who's our next target? Oh, that guy or that gal said something. We can make something out. And then once it starts going, if it's got any traction at all, then they just roll with it. Did you get a sense of what drove this persecution of her?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that is the two scenario approach that happens. But in this particular film, there is someone that she has this odd relationship with, their colleagues in a way, and I don't want to give too much of the movie away,
Sure.
but it seems to be that was the person who perpetrated, set the ball rolling, and then the media took it from there.
See, what I don't like about this, Christian, is as a reporter, I've always tried to be the skeptic. In other words, and sometimes, you end up with stories you don't even do. But if you say, if everybody says this is a good institution, let's take a look at the other side. And oftentimes you find in fact, I remember going to investigative reporters and journalists. IRE is a great group. I'm no longer a member, but I certainly like what they do. And they were formed after the murder of Don Bowles down in Arizona. And I remember going to one, and they talked about these journalists from Oklahoma City. And they said, we drive past Boys Town. You remember Boys Town, the movie and all that? And it was just this much beloved institution. And one day the reporter was driving by and sees Boys Town and thinks, every year I see them send out millions of fundraising letters, and I know they're getting millions in, and yet I don't see anything new there. And going after Boys Town would be like going after Mother Teresa or going after, some beloved institution, especially in Oklahoma City. And they went after it anyway. And the big paper there, the Tribune, found out that the institution was just piling up dollars in an endowment, not doing anything with it. So it wasn't benefiting the kids, but every year they'd send out more millions of, please send us money or we can't continue our mission. And in some ways it was kind of corrupt, except they never found anybody who was putting money in their own pocket, but they were committing the other crime of just piling up a giant endowment and not doing what you promised to with it. And it was a great story, but it only came because of skepticism from a reporter wondering, where are all the millions of dollars going? Because I'm not seeing it as I drive past it on the way to work.
Well, look at BLM. There's been a lot of stories in the conservative press in recent days about their financial situation. It's problematic, to say the least. Where is NBC, ABC, the Washington Post, the New York Times? Well, they don't want to dig into that story because it doesn't fit their narrative. Their narrative is very pro-BLM. But you have to look at an organization, any organization, and say, what's going on behind the scenes? And also, once the right-leaning media starts to sniff on a story and they've got some facts behind them, then everyone else should be jumping in, finding their own angles, doing their own digging, uncovering more and more of the story at large, but they don't want to do that. Today's reporters are more activists than reporters. It's sad, but it's the reality, and it's unavoidable.
And by the way, the key figure in BLM is Patrisse Cullors. Did you see the news that came down about Warner Brothers late this afternoon and Patrisse Cullors?
No, tell me.
Okay, here's Patrisse Cullors, the woman who got all this money, and then she went on a real estate shopping spree and spent $3 or $4 million of BLM money on luxury homes for herself. I mean, truly despicable behavior. Apparently, Warner Brothers had signed her to a deal worth a few $1,000,000 or worth some substantial money. And they were going to do this thing about, she's the champion of BLM. Apparently, that deal was quietly allowed to expire last year, and Warner Brothers apparently wanted it to just go away. But the fact that they fell for it as well and signed her up to do something that I'm sure was intended to be laudatory, and when it turned out that the whole thing stunk like a giant scam, they said, okay, let's back away from this one like you back away from a big bear.
How about we make a documentary about her rise and fall? Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be informative, provocative, and compelling?
And maybe they went to her and said, hey, you want us to do a documentary about how you ripped off all these people and bought all these fancy homes? And she probably said no. But, I mean, that was when I brought up Wiener, the documentary. It's well worth watching because I think when they went into it, they thought, here's the great comeback story, that Anthony Weiner shamed out of Congress for sending pictures of his private parts to some girl he doesn't even know at a college on the West Coast and blows up his marriage and everything else and gets forced out of Congress. Here will be the comeback story. And right in the middle of it, he goes right back to the same kind of pathological behavior and blows himself up again. So it turned out to be even better. And fortunately, Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's right-hand person, and Anthony Weiner didn't kick the film crew out because it was fascinating to watch. But it was like watching the Titanic go down.
Yeah, and interesting that I wonder if that all happened today and not a few years back like it did. Would they silence that documentary because it does, it paints a Democrat in a pretty negative light? Those are the kind of things they don't do anymore. They even though it's great and compelling and interesting and public interest and all that, I feel like that would be buried as well. I think
it would be, especially because it portrays this Huma Abedin as sort of in some ways the abused wife, and yet she's the right-hand, person that Hillary Clinton turns to. And I'm sure that's not a real popular theme to say Hillary had somebody working for her who had some interesting stuff in her background as well, but not as sick and perverse as her husband. And yet she's stuck by her husband all the way through and apparently to this day. That's Christian Toto. Christian, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so very much on a Friday night. Coming up in a moment, hundreds of thousands of auto jobs at risk if Joe Biden's EPA gets what it wants. We'll dig into that next on First Amendment Friday. Happy Memorial Day. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on a First Amendment Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll be glad to get to your phone calls and emails in a moment at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Always naysayers go to the head of the line, and if you want to send an email instead, talk@LarsLarson.com. And, of course, you can vote in the Twitter poll. You'll find that at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and LarsLarson.com on the web. I wanted to bring on Adam Brandon, who is president and CEO of FreedomWorks. Adam, welcome back, and happy Memorial Day.
To you as well. It's a solemn and wonderful weekend, and it's just wonderful. I was driving around earlier today, and I started seeing all those flags popping up at cemeteries, and it reminds you this is a great country, and a lot of people have made a lot of sacrifice to get us where we are today.
You're absolutely right. And Adam, I've had people say, well, celebrate Memorial Day. I said, well, if you have people who voluntarily, in most cases, put on a uniform, signed up for service, committed themselves 24/7, 365 for years, or in some cases decades, to put their lives in harm's way in defense of their own country, and they made the ultimate sacrifice, I think that is a reason to celebrate, not their passing, but the fact that they were willing to do that, and they did it for a great country. So I'm with you there. Let me ask you about this. What isn't realistic for me is the idea that Joe Biden is jamming some EPA goals down our throats at our own expense, and they don't seem to be realistic at all when you sit down and look at the math and the facts on the ground. Are they?
Well, a couple things happened in recent weeks, and I'm kind of stunned by this because I look at headlines, and it popped up here or there. But two things happened. Number one, the Biden administration, and now, mind you, this is not through law. This is not through voting in Congress and Senate where we can hold them responsible. These are unelected bureaucrats basically have set the rules so that in about 10 years, the overwhelming majority of cars and trucks sold in the United States will have to be electric.
Yep.
And if you think about that, when I buy a car, I want it to go 7-8 years. So this may be the next car your listeners buy. And it's, hey, if you want to go out and buy an electric car, great, go buy an electric car. But telling me I can only buy an electric car, hold on a second, and telling the industry they can only make electric cars, and the electric cars only have about 20 moving parts. What does that mean for the voter who's manufacturing car parts in a place like Michigan and Ohio? And what does that mean for you to make sure when you buy that car, now you've got to spend $1,500, $2,500 for a charging station? It goes on and on. But what makes it crazier is it's not just that. It's that the EPA also is now saying in that same time frame, power plants are going to have to sequester about 90% of their carbon. Where are we going to get the electric for these cars? Like, that's just not feasible. Science isn't there yet. Maybe someday it will be. But if you start shutting off, you're just going to put all this demand on right now for all this electric for these cars, and the grid's already at almost at 100%.
Yep.
What does that mean? This is just not realistic.
Well, and Adam, if we allowed I mean, if the private marketplace over the next 50 years made electric cars popular and gasoline and diesel cars unpopular, I don't think it's capable of doing that yet because the numbers aren't there and the prices aren't there. You would have a slow transition. But they're talking about such a fast transition. And what I worry about is this. I've seen a couple of states, including the one I live in, that said, okay, as of 2030, let's say, or 2032, 2/3 of cars on lots for sale must be electric, and only 1/3 will be gas. Well, in that interim period, what you're going to see is car dealers do anything that they would do the natural economic thing you do with anything that is in short supply. Remember where plywood went about a year and a half ago?
Right.
Went to like $80 a sheet. And you go, why? Because for whatever reason, it was in big demand, short supply, and the price would go through the roof. And I think this is part of their plan. They're going to tell you, you walk onto a car lot and say, I want to buy a gas pickup truck. And they say, okay, it's right over there. It's $120,000. And you say, what? You say, yeah, we only got 12 of them. We got a whole bunch of these electrics that you don't want to buy, and we got 12 of these. So since we only have 12 of them, they're not quite a De Beers diamond, but they're real close. So that's what you're going to pay. They're going to punish people and say, see, electrics are affordable. Yeah, because you've artificially jacked the market to make the gasoline and diesel cars artificially expensive because the car companies weren't given the choice, as you should always be given. If you're making a product, you should say, we're making a product. Which one is the one that the public wants? Say gasoline and diesel trucks. Say, okay, we're going to make a lot of those. And the government says, no, you're not. You're only going to make a few. And everybody who wants to buy one is going to pay through the nose. So it's only going to be rich people that drive pickup trucks, and it'll make the electric cars look good by comparison. Do you think that analysis is right?
I think that I never thought of that perspective. There's so many perspectives that this is just a terrible idea. And I go back to something you said. If the market was making this adjustment, I'm pretty confident we would get there. But I found that 1/3 of all the charging stations in the Bay Area are out of order. Yeah. Now, just think about that. You're going to go to work, and a lot of Americans drive a long distance. And you know, look, I've got 2 small kids now, and stuff happens in life. Like sometimes it takes me a while to do, just go get groceries with 2 kids running around. Maybe I forget to charge my car. This is going to change our lives, and there's going to be a lot of stress of where do you charge? Who's building this network? Where is it being built? The amount of problems. But folks, this isn't just some law. This is now a reg that's in that you've got to kind of start to adjust for. This is going to fundamentally change our way of life. Now, all this power demand and, just getting back, both these bills are problematic, both the electric car and this craziness that you're actually going to be able to produce power without carbon. Think about how much it's going to start to cost you to flip your switch at home. Think how much the brownouts and problems we've had in the past, this could become part of American life.
Yeah, it could. Like it. I remember when we were watching Saddam Hussein, and they said Tikrit is the only little city in that whole country that had the power turned on. Why? Because it was Saddam Hussein's hometown. And you say, well, okay. What about the rest of the country? They don't make enough power to keep all the lights turned on all the time. So you get 4 hours of power one day and 2 hours the next, and nobody ever gets 24 hours a day except Saddam. Well, that's where we're going to be. And they're doing it at the same time that they're saying, we're going to force you out of natural gas furnaces in your home. There's more demand. And we're going to force you out of natural gas water heaters. There's more electric demand. And they're ramping up the demand. At the same time, they're ramping down the supply. Econ 101 says that means the price of power is going to go out of sight. Right. And I mean, Go ahead.
I used to live in Europe when I was young for a couple of years. And one thing that struck me is that they didn't have dryers. And when I was living over in Poland, they didn't have dryers because dryers take up a lot of electric. Well, okay, so what? You get a clothesline, you hang your clothes up. Okay, great. Well, what I found is that just imagine this. You take your time, and I would have to do this. You do your laundry every week. You put your underwear on that line, and it dries out, and it comes off stiff as a board. So you got to start ironing your underwear. And you do that because electric's too expensive. Now, I just can't imagine in America where everyone's taking time out of their week to iron their underwear and their grocery, instead of having a nice big refrigerator full of food, everyone's living off of college dorm refrigerators. That's what we used to do when we were living there. This is a war on the suburbs.
Adam, thank you very much. That's Adam Brandon, the president and CEO of FreedomWorks. We'll be back in a moment. It's First Amendment Friday. Hey, are you a small business owner and could you use a few $100,000? Well, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out 1,500 small business owners. And what did they get? $300 million in funding. And they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits, and they're with you every step of the way, even in the event of an audit. They stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retained 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already got the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Money, you need to call Get My Funds now. 800-535-29. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I've got a lot to talk about today. It's a First Amendment Friday heading into Memorial Day weekend. I'd merely remind you one more time, the purpose of the weekend, yes, it's fun to have barbecues and visit with friends, but the purpose is to remember those who've made the ultimate sacrifice in uniform in defense of this country. Please remember that. But since it is First Amendment Friday, let's get back to your calls. And if you want to jump into the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Hey, Chris, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
I was just curious about the double standard for George Santos, House of Representatives. I haven't heard any single Republican come out and say he should be resigning from office, and he's going to have his day in court, yes, but it's the same thing you're talking about with the Twitter poll today.
So you don't listen to the show very often, because all of last fall I was saying Santos sounds like a bad character. He should resign. He's lied to get into his office. You heard me say it. Now, I'm still a registered Republican, although I always say I'm a conservative first, because too many Republicans are not conservative. But you've heard me say it, and I've seen other conservatives and Republicans say it as well. I don't set a double standard. I've always told people, if you break the rules, then you get the same consequence. And whether you're on my side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle, I don't hold up different rules for, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and George Santos. I think both of them are kind of a waste of oxygen. But Santos, I called for him to leave office last fall, when it became clear that he had lied to the voters. So there may be a double standard in some quarters, and you may see some elected officials say we're not going, some members of Congress. But those folks are so I guess, well, what word should I use that you could use on the radio? They are gutless in that they won't hold Mayorkas to account. They won't hold Biden to account. But you've never heard me defend George Santos. It seemed even early on we were seeing indications that this is a guy who regularly and routinely lies about who he is, what he's all about all of the things that he did to get into office. And I won't be in favor of seeing him reelected. On the other hand, I'm not in his congressional district, and who knows what his voters will do. I don't think they'll reelect him, but do you?
Nope, fair enough.
Okay, and that's all I'm saying is that, we don't often get a case like Congresswoman Andrea Salinas, who lied during the campaign, and then this happens so rarely. Her lies are really definable lies. I mean, if you say I'm the better candidate, or I've done the right thing, or those are general statements. When you say my opponent has been charged with possessing illegal drugs, that's one where you can test the truth or falsity of that statement, right? So she gets called out on the lie a month before the election and is told by an uninterested person not involved in the campaign, those statements are false. They are demonstrably false. They've never been true. They weren't even true for a while. And she says that's okay and keeps on running the commercial, lying about her opponent. In a case like that, should she have to give up her seat?
Yes.
I would agree with you. And I'm not for double standards either, David or Chris. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's go to David. David, you want to talk education? What about education?
Hi, Lars. How's it going today?
It's going very well for a First Amendment Friday heading into a Memorial Day weekend.
Well, I'm a very frustrated parent. My wife emailed you last week or the week before, having some problems, been going through some problems with the indoctrination of our children. I'm a stepfather. I've been trying to keep my mouth closed about this, but I feel that it is my responsibility at least to notify other parents the information. It's my responsibility. So yesterday's, you had many parents come online and talk about charter schools and how good they are. Well, I want to beware other parents that they are not cracked up. They are not all what they are cracked up to be. They will lie, they will hide, and they will indoctrinate your children as well. I have proof. I have a dog in a fight.
Okay, I'd be glad to see I'd be glad to see your proof. But can I tell you one absolute superiority of charter education over public schools? Okay, and I can prove it to you. And it's on the very subject you're talking about. If you move into a neighborhood where only K-12 education is provided only by government schools, and you're told if you live at this address, your kids go to that school. And if you say, well, what other choices do I have? And they say, you don't have any other choices in education provided by government. That allows that kind of indoctrination to continue. With a charter school, number one, you have some choice. So you can say you may have 2 choices, 3 choices, 4, 5, 6 choices, or just 2. But at least with 2, you've got some choice. Number 2, if the charter school does not perform well enough to have parents and their kids stay in the school, the charter school goes away. If it doesn't stand up to what it promised in its charter, it goes away. Have you ever seen a government-run public K-12 school go out of business?
Well, no, of course not.
But charter schools do all the time.
Right. Now, here out in Bend, Oregon, and in Redmond, my wife had the idea of pulling her children out of public school, putting them into a charter school.
Right.
Redmond Proficiency Academy is not what it's cracked up to be.
Then move. To a different school.
I would agree. Now, unfortunately, it is too late. My wife emailed.
Too late for what? Next fall is months away. The current school year is almost over. You've got time to make a choice about moving to a different school, and at least you have choice given charters. With government schools, you have no choice.
Unfortunately, our daughters are brainwashed and now convinced that they are supposed to be boys.
And unfortunately, that is a problem for the parents. I would suggest even a lawsuit. Because I'm not a big fan of lawsuits, but David, if you tell me my child was led to a gender change by being indoctrinated by the people at a government agency, it isn't often that government agencies can be sued successfully, but it does happen. And if you say my child was led astray,
their counselor.
I understand what you're
Their
saying.
counselor.
Well, then
Right.
will
And we
you
have
take
text
the
messages.
actions necessary to straighten that up?
Well, we were trying to, and we were hoping to get information from you, hoping that maybe you can direct us.
And all you've got to do, David, is send me a note. I'm not a lawyer, but we are in contact with a bunch of different organizations that go to bat for people on educational issues and on legal civil rights issues. So if you say my child's civil rights have been violated, a government employee caused them to go out and make changes in their life. Now you're going to fight against the counselors who are going to say, no, the child wanted to make the choice. Well, there are children who want to make all kinds of choices. I mean, there are kids who say, hey, Dad, I'd like to drive the family truck at age 12. And my granddaughter, who's 7, would love to drive my car down the public roads. I say, you cannot drive on the public roads. We will not let you. The law will not let you. David, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's great to be with you on First Amendment Friday. I'll get back to your phone calls and emails in a moment. Now, you would imagine that a guy who every week celebrates First Amendment Friday would be very much in favor of free speech, and I am. I enjoy my free speech, and I want everybody else to get the same privilege. I also understand how social media puts an awful lot of that at risk, because in social media, there are other actors that can take control of your free speech, even through places like Twitter and Facebook and the rest. We've seen how the FBI has seized control of parts of that. And then you've got communist China, which has TikTok. I don't have TikTok. I never have had TikTok on a device. I don't want to be around TikTok. I think that it is a spying device. But I've always argued that there ought to be a way for the marketplace to actually solve that problem. That when all the social media is either agreeing to silence political free speech that the media owner, the owners of Facebook and other social media disagree with, I don't want to be silenced. And at the same time, I've argued, well, maybe the marketplace will come up with something different. With that in mind, I want to talk to Nick Janicki, who is Director of Media Relations for a brand new social media platform called Ganjing World. And again, that sounds Chinese, sounds Asian anyway. Nick, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
So you kind of got a short primer on where I stand in all of this. I don't like TikTok. I think it is a spy device. It reports information back to the communist Chinese government, which I don't like. And I wouldn't like it if American social media reported back to the U.S. government to say, hey, we're going to tell you everything we know about Lars and Nick and everybody else. How is Ganjing World different? And in fact, you might talk about there is a tie to Falun Gong, isn't it? Isn't there?
Sure, absolutely. So, I would start off saying it's the Chappelle quote, right? So Dave Chappelle, the First Amendment is first for a reason. The second is there in case the first doesn't work out. So I just wanted to bridge the gap there a little bit. But so this is a platform that was created by Chinese Americans, not by a company in China. And I think that distinction is really, really important because it has a Chinese name, people associate it with China. And so I think it's really important to understand that the Chinese culture and Chinese Americans don't necessarily have anything to do with the Chinese government. And this was a company started by, to your point, people that were undergoing persecution in China. Some of the founders escaped persecution from China because of their religious belief and, decided, hey, there really needs to be a better way, a platform that's basically G-rated, it's family-friendly. So as you know, the rating system, there's R, there's PG-13, and there's G. And G basically means there's no violence, there's nothing harmful, there's nothing erotic, and there's no criminal activity. And so it was started with that in mind.
See, it sounds great. And in fact, in a lot of ways, Falun Gong has a position that is antithetical to the current regime that runs the dictatorship that we call the PROC, doesn't it?
Well, right. So, that's right. So some of this is what is apparent harm, right? So I think in a lot of social media, harmful is being used as a very vague category for censorship, to your exact point. So the idea here is, okay, can we have a platform that's family friendly? And I have to say our mission clears up how the algorithm works. So I always get a question about how does the algorithm work in detail? Well, that's proprietary. But I will say that the whole idea with Ganjing World is Ganjing means clean. And the mission is to basically, through technology, and empower people through technology to rediscover traditional values and divine culture in daily life. So that's essentially the starting point of the entire platform.
And by the way, Nick, I always tell my audience, if I have a dog in the fight, I'll disclose it. I don't get any money from Ganjing World. I don't do any ads for you. I'm not involved at all. So I just find ideas I like, and the ideas I like, I'll tell my audience about because maybe they'll like them as well. But the thing I like especially is the way you describe that. Founded by a group of people who had left a place to escape religious persecution. Let's see, it sounds an awful lot like the folks who founded the United States of America and said, we're going to write a constitution that says anybody can have any faith they want or no faith at all, even though all of them were Christians. But they said, we don't want to see religious persecution. Those are the folks who founded the United States. So having that kind of philosophy going into it sounds like a very clean philosophy. What else should people know about Ganjing World?
Yeah, I think for me, the key is that it is family friendly, right? So this is a safe place where kids can go. They're not going to be indoctrinated with harmful ideology, violent content, right? So there's a bill in Montana. There's a couple more bills coming out regarding children in social media. And, it's gone so far as to say, should 13-year-olds or children under the age of 13 even have any access to social media, YouTube, so on and so forth. So what I want people to know is there is a personal responsibility in the age of algorithms and the age of artificial intelligence that we as humans have to take. And it's kind of what I'm calling the birds and the bees discussion that you need to have with your children when they're using technology. Because not only can the content be damaging, but the very aspect or the very use of technology intrinsically can also be addictive. So what's the difference between red dye sugar, fast food, negative drugs, and technology, right? In many cases, technology has been built as a manipulation tool that hijacks your dopamine response in order to, basically make you watch more videos of the same thing. So if you're a parent with a child and your child's going on to social media, let's say they just turned 13, I would sit them down and have a very clear conversation on what is your intent for using this platform. If you're looking to be a nurse or you want a nursing degree, maybe ignore the things that don't comply with that, because the more you pay attention to things on social media, the more the algorithm is going to be used towards that. But if you're actually looking at things that are on your purpose, the algorithm is going to reinforce that as well. So it really is important as human beings that we're giving feedback to the algorithm as we use it, and people need to have that understanding.
See, and I'm with you that there ought to be parental responsibility, but I also say that if you say, well, my parents have told me not to go here, problem is there are tempting things for kids, and we all know about them. If you ask my dad, who's now passed away, but if you said, has Lars ever had access to beer at age 16 or 17? He'd say, well, I didn't give him any beer, and I told him to stay away from it. But I did. I did have access to beer at 16 or 17, and most of the time I chose not to do it. The social media is that on steroids, because you could say, well, I told my kids to stay away from the sketchy websites. Well, yeah, we all understand kids are tempted, and sometimes they don't have the maturity to make proper choices. Check it out. It's Ganjing, Ganjing World. I've got no dog in the fight or bias one way or the other than I like the idea that with all this talk about restricting age, with locking TikTok out altogether, which I'm not necessarily against, having one that actually bills itself as a clean world, no eroticism, no violence, no criminal or harmful content, sounds like a darn good idea. Nick, thanks so much for the time, and I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Lars.
That's Nick Janicki, Director of Media Relations for the brand new social media platform, Ganjing World. We'll be back in just a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get to your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. You can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. Vote in our Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show. And, of course, naysayers always go to the head of the line. The guy I agree with, I can't remember the last time I disagreed with Grover Norquist, the president of Americans for Tax Reform. He joins me now. Grover, how are you?
I am doing quite well. Good to be with you.
Very good. I finally, I think 6 months later, finally got my tax return. So that's a victory in my book, even though it's months late. But hey, that's the IRS, right? But is Congress at all concerned that the IRS is being weaponized, not just against all Americans, but in some cases against some very politically targeted Americans like Matt Taibbi?
Congress is very concerned about this, and we're finally making some progress. I don't know why Republicans didn't do this under Republican administrations. There's this fiction that when we elected Reagan, that everybody in the bureaucracy was our team, or Trump, right, or Bush. And the answer, it took Trump a little while to figure it out, but these guys are not on my team. They're not helping, and we need Congress. Even when we get a different Republican president, House and Senate, Congress needs to be overseeing the federal government, and the IRS is a good example of that, 24/7, even with perfect presidents or semi-perfect presidents, because the president can't supervise this. And you have to ask repeatedly and with subpoenas to begin to get information. You mentioned Matt Taibbi. This is a very left of center journalist. His book was praised by Bernie Sanders. You'd think he's protected, right?
Yep.
Well, he made the mistake of looking into the FBI corruption when they were telling Twitter who's allowed to talk and who wasn't, which is really frightening, right? The United States government.
Yep.
Imagine how the left would feel if they were stifling people on the left. This would be, no end of ridiculous. But they were shutting down conservative voices. Matt Taibbi was reporting this. And on the 9th segment, because he had thousands and thousands of pages to go through, tweets from the FBI telling Twitter, don't let this guy talk. In America, I understand East Germany, but in America, so that was the FBI, and so he's reporting on this. And on the 9th segment that comes out, it was printed out. This was on Christmas Eve, And it was a Saturday. And that night, the IRS opened a dossier on this journalist, the IRS, claiming it was about a 2018 tax return, which would be, 4 years ago?
Yep.
A 2018 tax return, and that they had sent him many letters, none of which they can produce, okay? And by the way, when you do look at it, the IRS owed him money. This is all manufactured. What did they do? They opened it up and they asked, what are the questions the IRS should ask if they're looking to see whether you're paying your taxes? They asked to find out whether he had a concealed carry permit, about how his registration, his party registration, his voter registration. I'm sorry, this is a political dossier on a guy. Somebody from the FBI called over to the IRS and had a friend start a file on a guy because it would look too bad if the FBI opened a file on somebody who was investigating the FBI. And then this stuff doesn't sit in some office with nobody looking at it. On March 27th of this year, okay, 3 months after they opened the file up, when Matt was testifying before the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives. That's Congress, right? That's the third branch of government.
Yep.
And that at that moment, as he was doing that, an IRS agent showed up at his house to leave a little note about this 2018 tax return.
Now, Grover, you talked about scary. Look,
yes.
30 years ago, I got audited a couple of years in a row. I think I know why. It wasn't because of my politics. I was a reporter at the time. And they sent me a notice in the mail. And finally, I ended up having to go down and talk to them. And at the end of it, I owed them like $110. And the second time it was like $120. On the third one, it was like $32. And I said, who do I write the check to? Because it was easy to resolve. And they said, for amounts less than $50, we don't even take the payment because it's too expensive for the IRS to do the accounting to take in $32. But they never came to my house. They never came to my place of employment. This is absolutely extraordinary behavior. Now, maybe if you're some, sovereign nation person who's, stockpiling weapons in Montana, and you may be committing other crimes, maybe at some point when you ignore all the letters and ignore all the contacts from the IRS, they say, well, we're going to have to go out and see this person in person. They did this to intimidate Matt Taibbi, who, as you point out, I read his stuff all the time. He's a very good reporter. I don't have to agree with his politics to like his reporting on things, and I like reading the other side. They did this to scare the daylights out of him. So you're right in comparing it with East Germany. This is like the GRU in the old Soviet Union. We're going to gather intelligence, and we're going to go out and intimidate the daylights out of people to get them to shut up, right? And is that America?
Yeah. It's not. Well, it is America if they were dropping a horse head off in his bed, but it's the ugly part of America. Hopefully not the government, for crying out loud. That's mob territory. I mean, this is so bad. And the answer that the modern Democratic Party and President Joe Biden have is, you know what? We should give these people $80 billion. That's an attaboy. That's a keep doing this. That's a we're happy with everything you're doing. If you're going to give somebody $80 billion, you think this is the time to ask for reforms that you might not have thought to ask for otherwise. But this is the IRS that gave tens of thousands of people's tax returns, rich people's tax returns, to a left-wing group called Publica so they could blackmail them. And then they went around. Every one of those is a 5-year go-to-jail thing. You cannot look at tax returns you have no business looking at if you're at the IRS. You can't give them to somebody else, show them to somebody else, and you certainly can't take thousands of them and hand them over to your left-wing friends for them to attack people. But that's exactly what the IRS did. It wasn't one guy's return. It wasn't some law firm that did a few tax returns and somebody broke into the law firm. You had to have access, keys to the kingdom of all, because they went in and asked for people by name and by how much money they made, and they just vacuum this stuff out. That leaves a paper trail, or not a paper trail and for computers, but a computer trail. You know exactly who did this.
Yep. And by the way, Grover, what is wrong with the Republicans that if you said this happened, we're going to haul up the person who knows about it, we're going to subpoena them, they're going to sit in front of Congress under oath, we're going to demand answers, and we're going to say, did you do this? Yes. If you didn't do it, who did do it? And we're going to say we want to see these people charged. Now, I know that's under the Biden DOJ, but you demand to know. And then if you're the Republican who got the answers, say, okay, we made a case. This person broke the law in the IRS, should go to prison. The DOJ won't do it. We're going to out this case to the whole public, and we're going to say, listen, this is what that agency is doing. And then we're going to chop their budget right out of the budget bill that we send over to the Senate. And if Joe Biden doesn't like it, if Schumer doesn't like it, then too bad. Because when you've got people breaking the law and they're not being prosecuted, we've got to do something about it. Grover Norquist is president of Americans for Tax Reform. If aging muscle and joints are slowing you down, use what I use. Lars here for Gen Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it into your knees, elbows, your shoulder and back, and especially your hands. It melts right into your muscles and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, for me, it's a great moisturizer. My wife and I love it. And it's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not yet sold in stores, but my listeners can get a trial-size bottle of 10 treatments for just $9.95. That's a $20 value. It's not a subscription, and shipping is free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get your calls, especially on a First Amendment Friday heading into Memorial Day weekend. Remember the reason that we celebrate Memorial Day. I guess we could say mark Memorial Day, but if you say there's a reason to celebrate because people have put on a uniform, done American service, put their lives in harm's way to defend our freedoms, I think that is something worthy of celebration, as long as you don't just make it barbecues and get-togethers over a long weekend. Carl Szabo joins me now, who's vice president of NetChoice, which is a trade association of businesses focused on, free speech and enterprise online. Carl, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
I want to ask you a question because I've been a little leery of Chat GPT and other AI-type devices like that, even though I'm really enthusiastic about technology, because it seems as though it promises all kinds of great things that it might help us do, but at the same time, it might be really dangerous as well.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to anything new, there's always that fear factor. When cars first came on the road, they actually required people to walk in front of them
with a flag
to warn
and at night
people,
with a lantern.
There was a car coming. And once again, we laugh back at that. And the same thing is true with ChatGPT and OpenAI and large language models. There's incredible opportunity with AI, but there's also a lot of fear that's going on, and some of that fear comes from uncertainty and unknowing what AI can do. And at the end of the day, AI basically just looks at a bunch of stuff and picks out what it thinks will be the best answer. And a simple example of that AI has been used in is cancer research. So when it comes to things like a breast exam, AI can look at millions of mammograms and begin identifying precancerous identifiers better than a doctor can. That's just because it can.
You know what, Carl? I'm gonna have producer Donovan check that line because his connection. I don't think it's the CIA or the FBI trying to get in the way of our communication or our call, but it's getting sketchy, and I want people to hear exactly what Carl Szabo has to say. And at this point, it's a little bit difficult to do that. So I thought we'll check the line and make sure it's working. And I understand the point he's making about cancer. In fact, I've cited the same stories that I've seen where doctors are saying if you go to the clinic, they take an X-ray, they do a mammogram, and the human eyeball looks at it and says, "I don't see a problem," but the computer looks at it differently and says, "No, we can actually detect the beginnings of a problem." They might be able to. I've seen some predictions saying you might be able to detect breast cancer or predict it years earlier. That's the bottom line, isn't it, Carl?
Yeah, exactly. And there are tons of other use cases, like when it comes to driverless cars, or just frankly helping to make boring tasks obsolete. And one last example is I was talking to my law students, and they were asking, hey, for our paper, can we use AI? And I told them, look, if you just use AI, you're probably going to get a C, because it's going to create some boring content, and I can kind of spot that. But what it can do is if you create a really good outline, it can kind of help insert those transition sentences. And that's kind of what we're talking about at the end of the day. There's great, incredible opportunity, but there is a lot of fear out there. And invariably, people always go to, what about the Terminator? And if that's a concern we have, then let's outlaw the Terminator. We don't outlaw the technology. Just like how, we don't outlaw hammers, but a hammer can be used to break a window or build a house. We outlaw the bad actions. We don't outlaw the tools or the technology.
Well, Carl, I'm not as worried about Skynet, although I guess maybe we should be. But you know what I'm worried about? I mean, I'm at the age where I'm not out applying for jobs all the time or ever because I like my current job and I plan to stay here for a long, long time. But here's what I think about it. A young man or woman walks in, applies for a job. And ordinarily, they'd see a human being, and the human being and other human beings would decide this person is the right fit out of 50 candidates. And they might be the great fit. They might turn out to be a disaster. With AI, what I worry about is people will begin to trust it. And the company will say, let's submit all the applications to the AI. Because in theory, just like the mammogram, the AI can spot little teeny differences in candidates that the human being would not have. So they will say this is a more accurate way to choose employees. And so some employee who might have been a perfectly great candidate gets shut out because the AI tells the humans, don't choose Carl. Don't put Carl in that job. He won't be good. And even if they say, well, why? The AI will say the whole collection of millions of pieces of data that you miserable humans with your gray matter can't possibly see what I'm seeing, but I'm telling you Carl is not the right choice. And at that point, you lose out on the job, Carl. And because the humans will say, well, we got to trust the AI. It knows more than we do. It can see more than we do. I worry about that. How do we resolve that?
Yeah, and that's a serious concern. So first of all, you have, what is a violation of, or you engage in unlawful discrimination. That is unlawful today, regardless of whether you use a machine to do it or whether you do it just by looking at a person. So people will not be able to hide behind machines that make decisions that violate existing law. But with respect to the machine itself, this is where the free market really comes into play. Because if I, as an employer, am using a system to decide who to hire, and that system is not giving me the best candidates,
yep,
I'm going to go use a different system. And in fact, what you'll see is competitors will show that one system is better than the other, or here's a blind spot in my competitor's system. So that's actually how we avoid these problems, is the free market will actually solve it for us, because if you create a new system that does it better than the other guy, you're going to let everyone know about the failures of that old system. And that's how we solve and address that problem. But once again, that's the free market, not government, not anyone coming in and trying to create rules or regulations. Because what we have seen so far is, for example, the Biden administration just announced last week that they want to inject diversity, equity, and inclusion into AI.
God.
Which is a horrible idea. Because the wonderful thing about AI is it can actually help eliminate those natural predilections that we have as a human being and just make it all about the data, the facts, the information, and whether that person is or is not a good candidate, regardless of their race, creed, or color.
See, and that's the second concern I've got, because you just identified it. We were told by the folks at Twitter before Musk, we're told by the folks at Facebook, why we have an algorithm that just looks at everybody's content and it doesn't screen out conservatives and allow liberals to say anything they want. And yet we've seen good examples of that, where the Palestinian Authority still has a presence on Facebook, but some conservative who opposes abortion gets shut out. And you say, hold on, your algorithm doesn't look as though it's balanced. And you say, well, no, we've made it so it's completely colorblind and all the rest of that. except that how will we be able to call out the AI? Say, you've designed an AI and the way you've programmed it, it seems biased against conservatives and for liberals. I hope that we're even able to see those biases. I mean, we certainly saw it in social media. There seemed to be a pattern there. And of course, what we got back from Musk and the rest of that bunch was not Musk so much, but Zuckerberg and others was, oh no, we're not biased at all. We're just screening out the crazies. And all the crazies just happen to be conservative. I mean, and that's the concern I've got. Carl, I appreciate what you do. And thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That is Carl Szabo, the Vice President of NetChoice, trade association for businesses focused on free speech and enterprise online. It is First Amendment Friday. Your calls are welcome at 866-HEY-LARS, and we'll get to those next at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I want to get to something and talk to you about it, but since it is First Amendment Friday, I want to be fair to the people who are listening. So if you want to join the session on a First Amendment Friday where everything is fair game, it's 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Naysayers always go to the head of the line, so if you disagree with me, you're more than welcome. And our Twitter poll today, if a candidate tells a big lie to get elected and knows she's lying, should she have to give up her seat? We'll talk about that as well. And, of course, you can send emails to talk@larslarson.com. Let's go first to Victor. Hey, Victor, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Yes, the
Victor?
United States has is the government of the United States. And the second is the news media, which is the propaganda machine for the wrongdoing that our government is doing to our nation.
Okay, now, the first part of your call dropped out. You're saying the biggest concerns or the biggest enemies of the United States are the U.S. government and the mainstream media that backs up what they're saying. Did I get you right?
Yeah. Yes, you got me. That's right.
Okay. I would tend to agree with you on both those. What do you do about it?
Well, we just have to, first of all, the people have to realize they're destroying the country, and I don't think we have to on doing it. There has to be a big change. Bring our industry back and our jobs back and quit driving us into debt. They want to go into a dictatorial total control of the individual, too, like the farmers, and they're putting all kinds of regulations on them. And I think this CO2 scam where they sell this CO2 tonnage is just a big hoax.
I agree.
Tax on everybody.
I agree. And Victor, they're going to use every one of those mechanisms. In fact, I was going to mention this later. An awful lot of the craziest ideas start in Western Europe, and then they come to the United States because the liberals in the United States just love almost everything that Western Europe does. So let me give you a practical example. The U.S. Constitution says you have a right to travel. Now, how you travel is not constitutionally protected, but if you said, I want to go from Los Angeles to New York, or I want to go from Florida all the way to North Dakota, the United States government cannot stop you from traveling. Now, whether you're able to fly or drive or walk or bicycle or ride a horseback or whatever is up to you. But your right to travel is a constitutional right. Let me give you an example of where France is doing this right now. And when I read about it, I thought this is exactly the kind of nonsense that I would expect from our government. So here's what the government of France has said. There are a number of places where you might travel from places in France like Paris and Lyon and Bordeaux. I've never been there, so I don't know. But you might be able to travel by airplane, fast and convenient, or you might get on a train, and then it'll take a couple of hours to get there, but you still get there. Well, the bottom line is the government of France is now banning short-haul airline flights because they say this is about climate change. So when you say, well, I want to go from Paris to, I don't know, some other place in France or some other place in Europe that's only a couple of hours away on a train, the government of France is now telling people you're not allowed to take the airplane. You have to travel by a mass transit, in that case, rail. Well, I could easily imagine people saying, well, I want to travel from, say, Los Angeles to San Francisco. And you say, well, you can. There's no train there, but there are buses and there are other means of getting there. Can you imagine the U.S. government telling the people in this country, you're not allowed to get there on an airplane? And we're doing that because we want to cut down on the amount of airplane travel, because airplane travel uses a lot of fuel and generates a lot of carbon. I agree with you. The carbon thing is a hoax. It really is, because the primary driver of changes in the atmosphere is water vapor. It's not CO2. CO2 is what they call a trailing indicator, not a leading indicator. In other words, it's not carbon first warming happens. It's if it gets warmer, you will see more carbon dioxide out there because of a lot of different reasons that all go back to how the atmosphere and how the plant life on this planet works. But can you imagine the government telling you there are certain kinds of means of travel that should be available to you? They're available to other people, but you're not allowed to take a flight, because if you do that, it'll burn more fuel than if we make you go to the train station, get on the train, and take 2 or 3 times as much time to get where you want to go. That's the kind of nonsense that we're up against, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the FBI is so crooked that they did all kinds of evil things trying to down Trump. And then Biden and his son, which have done things which the FBI should be bringing out, they cover for him. And, of course,
Yep.
same thing with the news media.
I want to mention something to you, and I'll tell you that I'm a former high school debater. Okay, I only went to college for a year and a half, and I was busy enough at college that I didn't really have time to go do debate, although it was a lot of fun. And as you've noticed, I've carried that on into my work here, because I'll end up debating with naysayers and all that. But, one of the things about high school debate or college debate that I always thought was great was you had to learn how to do good research. That was number one. Number two, you had to learn how to formulate a solid argument in favor of something or against something. Because when you're doing a high school or college debate, you have to argue for something in the first round. And then after you get past that round and you have another opponent, then you have to argue against it. And you flip each round, so that one round is arguing in favor, one round is arguing against. It forces you to be able to see the other guy or other gal's point of view. But debate has apparently changed. And I want to cite this piece that I thought was just fascinating. The people who judge high school and college debate, the Free Press is reporting, the judges themselves are forcing woke policy on your kids. At high school debates, they headline it, debate is no longer allowed. Now imagine this. When you take a look at the people who are judging debates, because of social media and everything else, there are debate judges who say, this is my philosophy. For example, the 2019 National Debate Champion, her name is Lila Lavender, and she now judges high school debates. So good to have somebody in the room that's actually done it before. It'd be like having somebody be a referee for a ball game and they used to be a coach, so they know the game. In the case of debate, she writes this on social media. Before anything else, including being a debate judge, I am a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. I cannot check the revolutionary proletarian science at the door when I'm judging debate. I will no longer evaluate. This is what she's telling to kids who are debating in front of her. I will no longer evaluate, and thus I will never vote for right side arguments, capitalist imperialist positions. Examples of these arguments are capitalism is good, imperialist war is good. In other words, she's already telling the debaters ahead of time, if you stray out of the political lane and you go up against my point of view, I won't evaluate you based on your debate skills. I'm going to evaluate you based on my personal beliefs and values. That's crazy. You got the Lars Larson Show.